providers and universities. So it's myself. So I'm Robin Walsh. I'm the head of residential services at Bournemouth University. Also sit on the CUBO board as housing lead on housing code and standards. And then also my co-host today is Rebecca Hayhurst from Unite. But Rebecca has got an absolute stinking cold today. She's not even taken herself off mute to say.
I will apologise because I am going to do minimal talking, but when I do talk, I will probably start coughing. So poor Robin's been thrown a hot potato this morning, and he's probably going to have a sore throat by the time he finishes as well.
That's okay. So Rebecca will do a little bit of talking. I'm going to do most of it. There will be time at the end for questions. We also have here today, we have Ben McCarthy from Nottingham Trent University, who's working with Edward Peck, who is, Edward, if you don't know, is the government nominated student support champion, Ben? Is that right? I've got that right, haven't I?
Yeah, that's it, Robin. Yeah, spot on.
Yeah. So Ben and Edward are doing some interesting work very related to this area, which Ben's going to sort of talk about for about 5 minutes at the end of this presentation, and then there'll be time for thoughts and discussion. So I will get started and bring up my screen. Sorry, it's putting its presenter view so I can do it. Right, okay, good. So everybody can see the slides, yeah? Just give us a, Ben, I can see you. Can you give us a thumb? Yep, you can, excellent. Right, so as I said, we're going to be looking at data sharing, but this is also referenced from and to the Information Commission Officer's guidance on data sharing, and we're looking specifically at an agreement that we've got in place here at Bournemouth University, and we've got this agreement in place with all of our accommodation providers that we have nominations agreements in place with, and one of those key providers, who, as said, Rebecca is here from today, is Unite Students. Okay, so firstly, just a very brief kind of introduction to Bournemouth University. If you're not aware, we are a we're a post 92 university. So prior to that, we were the Bournemouth College of Technology, then the Dorset Institute for Higher Education, and then gained polytechnic status, and then 92 went on to become Bournemouth University. We've gone from about 9,000 students in 94 to about 17,000 students in 2022. University split into 4 faculties, as you can see there. I've just detailed those. That's interesting. It's important kind of context, really, because obviously each university has a very different sort of model in place. Because we're a post 92 university, we don't have any of our own accommodation ourselves. So we don't own any of our own accommodation, and we manage very little of what we do have on lease agreements. So that means that we are very reliant on the private rented sector, and our partners are there on the screen. So we partner with Student Roost, with Hugo, with IQ, CLV, and with Unite, who are here with us today. So I think that's kind of really important context about what we're going to be talking about today, because it's for Bournemouth University, it's really important that we are able to work as collaboratively and as closely to being one team with these providers as possible, in order that we can influence and understand the student experience that's happening within these buildings, but very specifically about how we then can support our students whilst they're living in these private providers' sites. Okay, so that's really important context. Okay, I'm going to pass on over to Becca just for her to whip through her slide.
Thanks, Robin. So as Robin said, we're one of a number of providers that Bournemouth University work with. The reason that we're involved in this conversation is partly because of our scale. We're one of the largest providers of purpose-built student accommodation with in the region of 75,000 student beds across the UK. So in terms of our scale and our ability to respond to sector demands, we're best equipped to do that so it's easier for us than some of our smaller providers. My background is in higher education, so I did almost 16 years in student services. So what I'm trying to do with Unite, where I've been for almost a year, is to align some of what we're doing with the HE sector. So data sharing and the work that Edward Peck is doing is case in point. So if we can work together to kind of set some best practice and really show how it can work, given our scale, we should be able to influence some positive change across the sector. And our vision is to create a home for success within our accommodation. So ensuring that we're working closely with our partners to manage their experience and support them and invest in student mental health and wellbeing sets them on a better road for success where challenges might crop up along the way. We're also a FTSE 100 company, so we have to lead by example. So we have to get this right and we have to do it the best way so that we are setting that standard. And we've got a responsibility to do that. So we're not the only partner that Robin is working with, but we are working proactively with Robin and others to try and move the sector forward and really set the standard for PBSAs. I'll stop talking now before I start coughing again.
Thank you, Rebecca. Okay, so this is just sort of bullet points of what it is that we're going to be covering today. Oh, somebody's just joined us who's got the. Thank you. So we're going to be, as I said, if you're not aware of the background of the ICO's guidance, then there is a link on the slide there, and we'll share these slides afterwards. So I'd really recommend kind of going and having a look at the ICO guidance, because the agreement that I'm going to be sort of summarising today, the agreement that we've got in place here at Bournemouth with our partners, does cover off all of the key points that the ICO require around what should be in a data sharing agreement. So we're going to be talking about the purpose, the benefits, the who, what, how, the lawful basis, which obviously is a real key one that you're probably interested in. Talking about special category and sensitive data, access to that data, governance of that data, and then we're going to be looking at some more broader topics of kind of sector rollout, best practice, and the role of PBSAs at the end. Okay, so firstly, the background of the ICO guidance. So there are, broadly speaking, there are 11 key points that the ICO detail that should be considered and included when you are looking to set up an agreement, and I've set those out there. So, I mean, just scan your eyes over them. I won't read them all out. But what we're going to do is to now, over the next few slides, is to cover off each of those points that the ICO set out, and how the agreement that we've got here at Bournemouth covers those off, and there will be some references pulled out of the agreement. But at the end of this presentation, and we'll put it up onto the CUBO resources page, we will actually share the agreement as well, along with a protocol, which I'll talk about the protocol a little bit more later on. But this is specifically talking about the agreement, and as I say, we will share the agreement with you so you can see the detail of what I'm kind of summarising. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to start then with the purpose. So please do feel free to just kind of read through those bullet points. But essentially, the purpose of data sharing, it allows us to work collaboratively with our accommodation partners. what it does, it enables us to provide a framework for our processes, because our students actually reserve and book the rooms through our booking portal. We use StarRes, and then we pass that information over to Unite and our other providers. So the agreement sort of sets out how we do that. It provides us with the ability to support our students with reasonable adjustments, and then onward in when they're actually in the accommodation. It provides the legal basis for being able to do these things, and as well, you know, outside of the ICO guidance, it does align with the sort of direction of travel. And I mentioned Ben, who's here with us today. He's going to be talking a little bit more around what Edward Peck is working on, but also as well. And again, you might know this, you might not, but within the ANAC code, there's already a reference to accommodation providers signed up to the ANAC code around best practice and expectations around sharing information and having some kind of an agreement in place with universities. So the ANAC code is already moving in that direction. So I think broadly speaking, you know, it's what this allows us to do is kind of get ahead of the curve, really. It's also worth mentioning that going back to the agreement, it also sets out what the agreement isn't, and that is specifically that it's not to be used for purposes of sales or marketing. Okay, so benefits of a data sharing agreement. It provides a really clear role for the staff who are involved in that data sharing. It defines what information they can share and when, but what it also does, I think it just provides them with that reassurance that they're not going to get into trouble. And I think that's one of the key problems when you come to data sharing, is that it's usually the staff who are on the front line or in that sort of junior to middle management positions who have that information, and they're the ones who either want to share it or should be sharing it, but they just don't know if they can. And having an agreement in place like this just gives them that reassurance that they've got the backup of that agreement behind what they're doing. And it also allows us then to set out the purpose into both organisations' privacy notices. I'm going to be referencing privacy notices quite a lot through the coming slides. So again, so the ICO sort of say who are the parties involved in the agreement. The agreement really allows us to really clearly set out who the parties are. So as you can see, it's obviously Bournemouth University, it's the provider of the accommodation and or the operator or managing agent of the accommodation if it's different to kind of the owner provider. So basically we've got three parties there: BU, the operator, and or provider. It talks about which other, as the ICO asks the question, which other organisations should be involved in the data sharing, and there are specific kind of clauses set out within the agreement that the information can be shared with what you deem as subcontractors in exceptional circumstances, and it sets out when and how those exceptional circumstances arise. And I think really, again, sort of stepping outside of the agreement, one of the things that myself and Rebecca would sort of, when we were talking about this, one of the key points to raise here is around some food for thought around how do you broaden out to share with other parties, other stakeholders. So, you know, other people with vested interests such as the student union, the NHS, the police, the local council. So again, I think Ben might be able to mention something about that a bit later on. Okay, so we'll talk about, are we sharing data with other controllers? Again, there's a response to that within the agreement. The agreement really clearly defines that there's two parties involved, that they're separate, that they are separate data controllers, and that they are responsible for ensuring that the agreement is implemented and enforced within the two sort of organisations. Talk about what are the data items that we're going to share. So the agreement splits that out into three. You've got the basic information, so that's things like the student's name, date of birth, address, that kind of stuff. You've got preference information, because as part of the booking process, we prompt the students to provide some personal information about themselves that gets shared with potential other flatmates or new flatmates. So that's what the preference information is. And then we've got the kind of the sensitive special category data, and this is where things like health conditions, medical conditions, disabilities, criminal convictions, and personal data relating to parents and guardians come in. So they're the three types of data defined. So we then have a schedule in there. So which leads on to what data is shared. We then detail in a schedule, Schedule 1. Again, you can reference this when you have a look at the actual agreement when we share it. Schedule 1 has 4 stages to it, where we define what information gets shared. So the first one is this initial engagement with the accommodation portal. So that's where the students share the data with Bournemouth University. So that's where we gather the data that we require from the students. So stage 2 is around accommodation selection and booking. So that's where we set out the data that is shared with the provider that's essential for the forming of the contract. And then we've got stage 3, which is additional information which is held and shared between BU and the provider that allows the contract to work. So that's things like bank details, and welfare information to co-support the student, next of kin details, that kind of data. We then have stage 4, which is the more sensitive data, which kind of broadly speaking, that's sort of special category data, which is additional information that arises during the contract that is deemed to be essential for I guess for the good of the student. So that's, again, that'll be a lot of the sort of the welfare information. What is the lawful basis for sharing? So again, this kind of underpins everything, and this is set out in Schedule 2 of the agreement, because you need to be able to obviously justify and qualify why it is that you're sharing this data. So in Schedule 2, it goes into some detail, and I'm just going to share a few examples. So the personal data that we've got there in A. So this then relates. This is where I can obviously get a little. This is kind of the legal stuff. This isn't where I'm not a specialist. But these are the articles, the GDPR articles that justify and allow us to share the personal data that we are. B is the special category data that is shared, and again reference to the specific articles within GDPR, that these are based on explicit consent. So this, for example, is any information that are required for reasonable adjustments within the accommodation, or any information that the student gives us that we then provide to the provider before they move in, around kind of their well-being and welfare that the provider would require. We then have kind of the sort of third example of special category data. And this is the trickier one, because this is the one where what was done in the agreement, we set it out where this is the kind of information that arises during their contract, that typically the provider will become aware of first, but it could be one of our residential life wellbeing team might find out about this information. And it's specific kind of, so mainly welfare, but it could be to do with sort of behaviour, antisocial behaviour if it's really serious. But this is mainly sort of focused on welfare, and then about being able to onward share that information without the explicit consent of the student. So this is where I think this is where a lot of people start to feel a bit kind of nervous about sharing this data, and this is why it's really useful and to have the reassurances of the agreement to back up what it is that we're then able to do. So obviously I'm not going to sort of read up through all of that, but again we can share these slides and you can kind of have a look at it, and then you can have a look at the agreements as well and see just read through this in a bit more detail. So I'm not going to go into the legal kind of the legalities of all this because I'm not an expert. Okay. So is there any special category data, sensitive data or criminal data? So yes, there is. We've referred to that. The agreement defines that both parties need to have policies in place that cover the sharing of this specific kind of special category data. So for example, one of those is criminal convictions. The BU policy on this one is that we share that on a risk basis. We'll do a risk assessment. So for example, if a student sort of presents with a criminal conviction that is nearly spent, that is sort of a low, we deem it to be low risk, there's no safeguarding kind of issues involved in the criminal conviction, we wouldn't share that with the provider. If there was, then again it's on a case-by-case basis that we would share that information. So it's about access and individual rights. So again, the agreement is really clear that that what's in the agreement needs to translate into the privacy notices of each party, of each data controller. So the students can obviously refer to that to see where they stand and what's happening with their data. And it also clarifies that each data controller responsible for managing the statutory rights of the students to request access to the data and how it's been used. So this is more about governance. So the things in bold are the ICO guidance. First one is about having detailed advice about which data sets can be shared and preventing excessive information being disclosed. So again, that's covered off in Schedule 1, which I've already talked about. Point 2 there sets out the requirement for appropriate levels of information security to protect the data. And then point 3 sets out the requirements for each of the data controllers to train their staff, so they're obviously aware of what they can and can't do under the agreement. And this is continued. So point 4, this sets out the points at which the agreement is or can be reviewed in order to sense check that it's still an effective agreement, or whether things have changed and the agreement needs to be updated. Okay, so that's sort of a real whistle-stop kind of run through of the ICO guidance, and then just kind of referencing some of the key points of how our agreement does cover those points off. So as as I said, we will share the agreement after this, so you can have a look at it in more detail. It is heavily caveated that it is obviously it's not to be kind of used in its form, and it is kind of you can use it at your own risk, and it might not be relevant for your organisation, but we will share it with you so you can see what it is that we do here. So now I just kind of really want to kind of sort of heading towards the end of the presentation. So we'll just talk a little bit more about kind of rolling this out, some of the challenges that we've had in getting these agreements in place. So some of the things to sort of be alert to was this kind of thinking about the partnerships that you've got in place with different providers, it helps to have established and good relationships with these providers. I think both data controllers need to have a real sort of willingness to want to be able to achieve something that results in an agreement. So that's I think I'd highly recommend that you need to develop those relationships with those providers. And I think probably what you'll find is a lot of those providers will be actually, it's about finding the right people to talk to. But when you find those right people, then there is a willingness out there to want to put this kind of thing in place, as Rebecca talked about earlier. Particularly, Unite in particular, they should, if you've got Unite as a partner, there should be an open door on something like this. I think one of the challenges of working with providers, though, it's around staff turnover and consistency. So we find that sometimes it's difficult when you have changes in the teams who you put these agreements in place with, and there isn't sort of a handover that these agreements are already in place. So, for example, and it wasn't Unite. We had an agreement with one of our other providers, and everything was working well. And then just out of the blue, we got contacted by their legal team with a draft data sharing agreement saying that they were looking to roll this out and wanted us to kind of sign up to this data sharing agreement. And I said, well, we've already got one in place with you. So they went away and had a dig around and they found it. So, it is about sort of, once you've got those agreements in place, it's just about really making sure that that you're continuing that conversation at that sort of more sort of higher strategic level to make sure that they're not forgotten about. I guess one of the big things is around sort of internal dynamics, and how you actually share data within your organization. This is something that I've picked up talking to colleagues from across the sector. I get the impression that sometimes the accommodation teams, they have frustrations internally, let alone externally, around how data is shared. So I hear stories sometimes of how information might be held by a student wellbeing team or the estates team, or depending on how your sort of organisations divvied up, and then they won't share that with the kind of the frontline accommodation team who are dealing with the residents. And it's there's frustrations internally that universities see themselves as separate data controllers within one organisation, whereas actually what you need to do you kind of need to get that in order if that's the case. And I guess one of the real benefits of working at BU was that it was, when I joined in 2015, it was never seen that way. We've always seen ourselves as one data controller. So that internal sort of sharing of data has never really been a problem. But I do recognise that is one of the key challenges out there for some universities. Yeah, proximity partnerships, geographical spread of those partnerships. I think thinking about sort of what Rebecca was talking about earlier around sort of Unite's approach to student wellbeing. You're working with lots of different providers potentially. We certainly were here at BU, and each of those providers are either in the process of or already developed, and will be continuing to develop their own sort of ways of dealing with student wellbeing. And to get an agreement in place with those sort of different organisations who have got all sort of slight different nuances is a real challenge. The agreement that we've been talking about today took about 2 years to get that in place, because there was this constant back and forth between all of the different providers, legal teams and health and safety teams and operations teams, and trying to sort of ironing out those nuances in order that we could get the same agreement in place with all of those different providers. That took a lot of time. But once you've kind of got that in place, then it actually stands the test of time. And then finally, just sort of talk about, I touched on it earlier when I talked about the protocol versus the agreement. So one of the things that we've done is we've obviously got this agreement in place that I've been talking about today with the nomination partners, but we've also developed this new document called the protocol. data sharing protocol, and that's for our non-affiliated providers in Bournemouth. And what that is, it's a document that sets out the legal basis for sharing, when we expect those sort of direct let providers to share information on our students with us, referencing the legal basis, but also we've included some real case studies in there to set some context. And that's something that we're kind of currently rolling out at the moment. But it just kind of, protocol for one type of sort of provider and an agreement for another type of provider. That's just something that's working for us. Okay, Becca, I don't know if you wanted to sort of to jump in here and talk about the role of PBSA at all.
Yep, I've braced myself to speak. Thanks, Robin. So just following on from Robin's comments about sector rollout, just a couple of observations about Bournemouth in particular. We have some quite established sort of ways of working in Bournemouth and staff who've been enrolled for a long time. So one of the things that lends itself to those strong partnerships is having staff that know the property, know the area, know the university. But I'm also conscious that we can't be reliant on those. So, where we have areas of high staff turnover, that might be more problematic, which means that there's even more need for us to have clear referral pathways and really establish ways of working so that we're not reliant on those individuals. But it certainly proves to be a benefit there. So in terms of the role of a purpose-built student accommodation provider, we do have a duty to work with our university partners to manage that two-way flow of data in order to manage risk. So it's not about us needing information from the universities and not giving anything in return. It has to work both ways. We have examples where things can and do go wrong where we haven't known about a student's situation. But we also have occasions where things go wrong where actually the university hasn't been included in the loop as early as they should have been. So we have to meet halfway to manage this. And one of the things that Robin and I have talked about previously is the need to make sure that those connections and that communication happens at the earliest opportunity, so that we're effectively supporting the student to achieve positive outcomes. One of the ways that we need to do that is by aligning our approach with the HE sector. So rather than solely focusing on accommodation and tenancies and whether a student should be residing with us or shouldn't be residing with us, we also need to align with things like support to study or fitness to study processes, and really understand, well, what would a university be doing if they have these levels of concerns around academic engagement? So it's mapping our work against the work of the HE sector and making sure that we're engaging at the right stages in that journey. So we need to also work to those regulatory frameworks that go beyond the basics. So the basics are, offering a room, offering a tenancy agreement, but actually what should we be looking at to improve that? We can look at things like mental health, chartership accreditation, exploring things like a trusted contacts guidance. So working on that UK guidance, responding to anything that comes out of Edward Peck's work around sector best practice, and making sure that we're leading the way rather than just following behind. Sorry. So we have a duty to develop our own frameworks and processes that are fit for purpose. So not making it up as we go along, being alert to how it would be dealt with in university halls of residence, for example. And that can range from everything to complex mental health difficulties to incidents of sexual violence. The way in which we're responding needs to be fit for purpose. It needs to be safe and it needs to be boundaried. And all of that needs to be captured in our data sharing agreements and in our processes so that we understand what to expect from each other. We need clear points of referral and escalation, both internally as a business. So if something is dealt with in property, how does that member of staff escalate it within the business, which is where we introduce student support officers, student support managers, but likewise, where are those points of referral? What are the referral pathways into the university? And where is the escalation through our partners? Which is why I'm particularly interested in that multi-agency approach to student support. So Robin has a good model in Bournemouth monthly meeting that brings the right people together to actually help to manage risk, but also to work proactively to reduce incidents of concern. So Bournemouth also have a wellbeing guide that they issue to their accommodation providers, which captures some of that, so that actually our accommodation providers understand how to follow the referral pathways, who's who within the university and who would they need to contact. So it's a really sort of secure approach to managing that relationship. And that's something that we would like to see across the board. Next slide, please, Robin. So support to stay is what we've introduced at Unite as a way of capturing some of that. So within universities, you'll have your own frameworks, your own processes. You'll have something along the lines of support to study or fitness to study, levels of concern and levels of response that match that, with the ultimate goal to be actually keep students in study as long as they're well enough to be there, and to support them through that process with the right reasonable adjustments, the right touch points. So we wanted to model some of that within our accommodation. More often than not, the two things go hand in hand. So if there's problems within the accommodation, there's probably problems beyond that as well. But sometimes we find that actually the way that people are behaving in their accommodation isn't reflected in the way that they're attending or engaging in the classroom. So it's also about connecting the dots and making sure that that data sharing agreement and those conversations between the partners actually capture a student's full picture. So it's a real holistic approach to supporting our students. Sorry if you can hear my dogs making strange noises behind me. So from our perspective, an element of that is about proactive work. So it's about having the right campaigns at the right times. So, for example, if our university partners are doing something for National Student Money Week, we should be doing any financial support messaging around the same time rather than a different week in the academic year. Having the right signposting. So are we connecting students to the support available within the university and the community at the earliest opportunity? And is it the right support? So part of that is around our staff training, making sure the staff don't overinvest and that they know how to look for warning signs and symptoms, but then they're not trying to respond to those themselves. They are connecting the student to the right support, which is why the guide that Bournemouth give actually is really useful, because you know who the right support is and how to contact them. Our resident ambassadors are part of that, which is an area that we're building on at the moment, looking at transition support and reasonable adjustments. So what are our students telling our university partners about their needs, and are we actually factoring that into their accommodation? It's particularly helpful with our nominations agreements, where actually there is that communication flow where we will know who needs what. Slightly more challenging where we get individual applications from students and we know which university they're with, but we don't have a partnership agreement in place. So we need to find other ways of working that aren't solely reliant on that agreement, so that students get the best experience and they can settle with us from the outset. The other thing that we would conduct is things like welfare checks. So where there's a cause for concern, either raised by the university or a parent or a trusted contact, we actually conduct a welfare check. But there's no point conducting a welfare check if we're not communicating back to the university about what that situation is and whether there is an escalating cause for concern. Where we do have those concerns, we work up through our support to stay model. So the low level stuff at level 1, those early warning signs, we've equipped our team to respond to those with the right signposting and swift intervention. But where those concerns escalate or continue, that's where our partnership work with our universities really needs to come into play. We need to have that real multi-agency approach, particularly if a student's been hospitalised and then they get discharged. Are they being discharged into the right environment? Is it a safe environment? Do they have a support plan in place? So there is a real need to factor the lived environment into those conversations. So those data sharing agreements and that really trusted and strong relationship with our HE partner is crucial at that point, so that we don't mishandle that student's situation. So ultimately, from our perspective, it's not about trying to reinvent the wheel or tread on toes. It's about doing work that aligns with what the universities are doing and is really student-centred. So that data sharing relationship is crucial to that. If we don't have that in place and we're trying to seek consent at a point where a student is already in crisis or in difficulty, we're trying to navigate in a way that actually the student may not be comfortable with or might agree to something that they wouldn't normally. So having these processes and agreements already set out and having them in a transparent way, both for us, for our university partners and for our students, means that we're heading things off at the pass rather than waiting for them to go wrong. I'm going to stop talking now.
Thanks, Rebecca. You did very well. Okay, I'm going to end that was the last slide. So I'm just going to sort of bring us all back into the room. So hopefully that was useful. I mean, just the last word for me really is, out of having these data sharing agreements in place, allows it's great to have all of that sort of structure in place, that framework, but out of that, and picking up on some of the stuff that Rebecca was talking about, it allows us actually to kind of to innovate and to work together and to come up with these sort of different things that emerge out of this close collaborative approach that wouldn't have done if we were sort of working in parallel with each other or at cross ends, or just just kind of like having these barriers between us. The closer you can work together, then actually naturally and organically good practice and new innovations actually just emerge naturally. So I just want to sort of just take a pause there and just going to pass over to Ben. So I've mentioned Ben before. So Ben, as I say, Ben's working with Edward Peck, who's the government's student support champion, and they're doing some really interesting work, and I can't wait to see it around data sharing between accommodation providers and universities. So I just want to hand over to Ben so he can give us an update of what they're doing and what to expect.
Thanks, Robin, and thanks, Rebecca, for that really helpful presentation. I think it was really, really helpful. So just to give you a quick overview of the work Edward's doing. So this really stemmed out of a roundtable we held in August, which looked at information sharing, in particular to support students most at risk. And I think what emerged from that was a need for a more consistent, more sector level approach to sharing information between universities and accommodation providers. So we're working with Unipol and CUBO, and UUK have also supported this work. And essentially, I think the guidance is aimed around four key areas that I think need addressing. One of which is the difference between nomination providers and direct, and those providers that operate on direct let basis. I think there's obviously a difference there in how that provider interacts with the university, the closeness of that relationship, how they understand their role in the broader student support system. And also, obviously, nomination providers are likely more to have a data sharing agreement. So there's some scope there to think about what that difference looks like. Second of which is around the size of accommodation providers and the scale of them, and the impact that has on the investment that they place on student mental health. So the larger providers like to have a better understanding of their role in supporting students, identifying students most at risk. And I think kind of leading on from that, the smaller providers, which may well be direct let, they need probably more support in understanding what support is available within university, how they can refer students into it, and how students can access it. Thirdly, looking at different approaches to data and information governance. Again, this probably is based on the scale and size of a provider. The larger ones like to have a better understanding of information governance, what can be shared, what can't be. So we're looking to have a section on the legal basis to sharing information. And then finally, the last one is, which applies to all providers, is again looking at how they can share information without consent, because it isn't always appropriate or possible to secure that consent if a student is in a crisis. So we make no kind of we're leaning quite heavily on the work of Bournemouth for this one. I think there's some really good work there between Bournemouth and Unite to look at the difference between a data sharing agreement and also a protocol. So we should have this guidance out in January, and we're still figuring out what the best forum is to publish this. So we're trying to find a home for Edward's work, potentially on the DfE website, but he will be updating the sector in January on that. So you should all receive an update on that. I'll make sure you all receive an update on that. And any other questions about that, I'm more than happy to take those outside of this call as well. And then one final point, we're also, as Robin kind of alluded to, we're also looking at how that the principles around that information sharing can also be applied to other external organisations, particularly students' unions, but also the work that the police and local authorities do around suicide prevention, supporting students most at risk of mental health crises as well. So that should be in the new year. So we'll have more to share on that in the coming months as well. So thank you all.
Great, thank you, Ben. Okay, so we've got about 13 minutes left or so. So I guess this is sort of an opportunity really to kind of open it up to you guys to kind of give us your thoughts, any ideas, any best practice you're already doing. Maybe you have have data sharing agreements in place yourselves. Maybe you're looking to develop one. Maybe you're already talking to a provider. Maybe you've got that problem internally that I mentioned before, that nobody shares information internally. Okay, so is that Trudy? Have you got your hand up there?
Yeah, hi Robin, thanks, and thanks Rebecca as well. That was a really good presentation, and I think what it does is sets a baseline for removing quite a lot of the fear of sharing information at the right time or at all. It was really a question rather than an observation, but it was a question to say, on that basis, what processes or procedures have you actually put in place to make sure that all of your staff are aware that this is a thing and making sure they know what to do?
I think from our point of view, it's about don't sit down with the staff and sort of take them through the data sharing agreement, because you might have guessed when it got to the GDPR articles, I wasn't particularly smooth with that part, and it can get very legalese, and actually I think it just that could just potentially put up more barriers and confuse people, because they always think, oh, which article is this under? Actually, what you need to do is, once you've got the agreement in place, is then use that agreement to review your existing processes and your privacy notices, because that's where you kind of implement and transfer the agreement into practice. So, as you know, your privacy notices should set out in more sort of understandable language what happens to data and when, and and how. But then your actual processes, as long as your processes then then follow on from that your staff use are in line with the agreement, then actually the staff don't need to kind of know all of the GDPR articles. They know that the process that they're following is in line with this data sharing agreement that they know is in place to support them.
Shall I cover that from an accommodation angle? So in terms of our staff, just as a point of note, we have been through a bit of a business restructure. So we've had quite a high turnover of staff and a lot of staff changing roles. And as a result of that, there was an acknowledgement that we would need to put more investment into training. So part of that training is to cover off what's our framework, how are we going to work, and who are we going to work with. So there's loads of elements of that training that we're covering. We also have restructured the student support team so that we've got regional student support officers who are more operational and liaise with our city teams and property staff. And then we have regional student support managers who operate as a point of escalation, but also are then the strategic lead and have close partnership relationships with our HE providers. Slightly problematic in the south at the moment because my manager is on maternity leave, but hopefully Robin doesn't feel that he's been shortchanged on that front. So we've built models that allow for escalation and allow for people to ask the question if they're not sure. So I wouldn't expect a student experience team lead in a property to necessarily know straight away, oh, what's our partnership agreement with Bournemouth, and what can I say and who should I be saying it to? But they should have a good understanding of where to find the answer or to escalate it. So we have duty managers on call, we have regional general managers who work closely with our university partners, and Robin will know them. We have property general managers. Their knowledge of this should be really good so that they know, who do we speak to, what's our position. But ultimately, normally in these situations, we're at a point of managing risk. And then it changes the balance, doesn't it, in terms of how we need to respond to things. And again, that boils down to training. So we have put a lot of time and effort into that, and investment as well. And I acknowledge, as a large provider, that's easier for us to do than some of the smaller ones. But some of the principles of what we're doing don't necessarily need investment. It's about knowing the signs and symptoms of someone in distress or difficulty, or that they've had a negative experience, and how to signpost. So having that local knowledge and that university knowledge at the same time, and some of that doesn't take heavy amounts of investment to embed in sort of the staff within the property. Hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, I think just one of the thought that's occurred to me is, you know, I always sort of tell the team that it's better to, you know, if you really think that you've got a piece of information there that is of real concern to you, and that you're thinking, I don't want to hold on to this information, this just doesn't feel right just to hold this information myself, then you share it, you know, and you look at the consequences afterwards. Because I remember a couple of years ago at the Joint Codes Conference, there was a really good panel discussion on this, and we had somebody from the ICO was on the panel, one of the senior people from the ICO, and I remember at the end she pretty much, kind of paraphrasing, that's pretty much what she said. You know, she said, look, you know, we would want you to share the information. If you're doing it for the good, you know, the reasons you're doing it is for the genuine concern and welfare of a student, then share the information. Because if you can point at that and justify that, you know, you've made an assessment and it's for the good of the student, the likelihood of any action being taken against you is almost nil. You know, don't quote me on that, but I'm paraphrasing, but that's pretty much what she said. So I always encourage that with the team, because I also know that, you know, at the end of the day, you know, I know the team are doing it for the good of the students, and I will back them up, and we've got that agreement now in place that supports us anyway. So, you know, Jake, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Robin, and thank you, Rebecca, for the presentation. Hello, everyone. I'm from Liverpool John Moores University. We have 9 third-party providers in our makeup, our setup, how it all works. Just a few things I wanted to ask or pick up on with regards to what you just mentioned then, Rebecca, about who knows the agreement. The way, since I've came into this role here at the university, and I'm only just over a year into it, I found that there was a lack of knowledge from the site teams and the ones that are actually having the face-to-face student contact as to how the process works. So one of the first things I did was install a welcome meeting, a very open house meeting to all of the staff that were working at the properties in our third-party providers to say, this is how the process works, this is how it operates, this is escalation, this, to make it as transparent as possible, because they're the people who see the face-to-face. The managers don't necessarily are front of house or the first responders to a crisis or then how to manage it. They manage it post-incident than anything, but never in the incident itself. So that's a best practice that we've seen from ourselves, that we've rolled out, and actually seeing much more or better management of cases than anything. Then my second point was about, you touched on something earlier on, Robin, in how you would then go about finding, I think it was under your sector rollout slide, and you were talking about when you decide on a provider and basically do due diligence of them, and like and Rebecca's touched on it about the Unite Students restructure as such, and there's been another partner who's had a similar or a major business decision made for them, who were very transparent with us right from the outset. This is what's going on, this is how it's going to be, this is how it's going to affect your students. We didn't get that from Unite Students, and it's made us now look back at our entire structure to go, if these third-party providers are making serious business decisions which directly affects our students, at what stage should we then be brought in, consulted if need be, or at least communicated to? The Unite stuff in Liverpool, we've found out third, fourth, fifth hand, because no one told us about it until it was underway. And we even found out from students before they then came to us, and one of the the larger providers and agreements. So we've then taken that and moving forward with our partnerships with other providers, and even then seeking new providers. Liverpool's got a provider popping up every week, but the fact of then going, okay, then we need to be a bit more mindful as when this changes down the line about how they then communicate back to us. And then finally, it was a touch on the training point, to which Rebecca, you touched on about saying how Unite students are really striving and driving to get staff trained up and put on more investment and getting it more linear. Do you feel from a provider side, and I've disclosure, before I joined university, I worked for Student Roost, I worked for Vita Student, I've done PBSA side of things, but do you feel as as from a provider side, that the university should have more involvement in the training structure to get that standard, at least a baseline standard, from what a university expects from a member of staff who's then going to have an effect on a student. I know there's a lot there, my apologies.
There's quite a few bits to cover there. So firstly, around the restructure, absolutely agree. HE consultation should have been a part of that. I can't really comment on it because I've only been with the business 11 months. So I walked into it. Sorry, my dogs are having a scrap again. So I walked into that restructure. So I can't really comment on that, but I can certainly feed that back. And I think that is appropriate. You know, if there's something that's going to impact on your student population or the ways you work, then yes, you should be engaged in that process. In terms of the training, one of the things that we do want to do is that collaborative approach to training. So actually connecting university staff with property staff, probably just before term starts, introductions, networking, probably a bit of a workshop. It is aspirational. We did an Amoshi workshop on support to stay and consultation, and that was one of the things that came out of it. Is this actually we felt that would be mutually beneficial. So I certainly want to go down that route. In terms of the training that we're doing at the moment, we're working with an e-learning provider called Marshall eLearning, who've worked with multiple HE partners. So what we've done is taken some of the packages that were already there. So for example, one of the packages I think is from Manchester Met, and it's around signs and symptoms of students in distress and what we do. So we've taken kind of the baseline of what's already there and then tailored it to fit the PBSA environment. The challenge that we've got in trying to do it any sort of more detailed than that is not all of our partners have the same referral pathways, the same staffing structure, the same numbers of staff. So, for example, we've got a strong partnership to Sheffield. Sheffield have clear referral pathways. They have a good multi-agency approach to their work. My regional manager meets with them on a weekly or fortnightly basis as a bit of a case conference. And we've got some clearly established ways of working. We've got some really, really small providers like the Royal School of Ballet, where it's tiny, and actually their wellbeing provision and their setup doesn't lend itself to having that same relationship. So the training that we deliver has to be one size fits all for the business, but nuanced enough locally for them to understand what that means for them, which is where my team go in and then deliver the training. My team is relatively new. It's doubled in size, but only since October. So I'd like to think that 12 months from now, it would be a very different conversation because we've got the infrastructure to support it. Hopefully that answers the question, but I'm happy to pick up with you separately if you think that would be helpful.
No, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add, I mean, we're almost at time now, but just kind of the only thing I would add really is that it's not easy to develop these agreements. But once you've got the agreement in place, it's not then you just sit back and just then allow things things don't just roll from that. That's kind of almost like day one. Once you've got the agreement in place, because then you need to implement the agreement. You need to make sure the agreement remains kind of implemented. This whole thing we touched on earlier, which I heard from you, Jake, is around the staff turnover, and it's about making sure that you've got those touch points, that regular communication in place, in order that you are part of that. You continue that conversation as an ongoing conversation all of the time, and that you're reviewing the agreement, you're reviewing the processes together. And those meetings between the partners, they have to be in your diary, and you have to keep to them. If you let things drift and just assume that everything's okay and that the processes are just going to flow from that point on, that's not going to happen. That's when the parties start to kind of go like that. And what you want to do is actually you want to head in that direction instead, don't you? You want to be bringing us closer together with universities and PBSA, and that's the big challenge that I think. So you've got to be committed to this. Long term, both parties need to be committed to this, and avoid the temptation to go off and start working in parallel with each other again. Okay, so we're kind of at time. So I don't know if anybody else had any sort of final comments or queries, but I mean, I'm happy to be contacted after this. As I said, we will share the agreement and also the protocol via the CUBO resources page. I think is probably the best place for it, and we'll send a message out. And I guess we'll make the slides available. And I think this is being recorded as well, isn't it, Sarah? Yeah. Okay. So hopefully you've all found that useful. Food for thought there. Really interested to see obviously Edward and Ben's work early in the new year, which is hopefully going to sort of provide some better, clearer guidance that we can kind of all use across the sector. And thanks for your time today. Thanks again to Rebecca for coming along, even though she's about to go and curl up in bed with a glass of Lemsip with those dogs. Keep them quiet. All right, well, have a good afternoon, everybody. Good to see you all, and all the best with your data sharing work. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.